Welcome to Bad Lip Reading. My name is Ed Martin, and I'm one of the pastors at Community Christian. We are so glad that you are here to be a part of this today. You know, if you haven't been a part of this series, what we've been talking about are really, they're just spiritual assumptions people make, and people really do believe they're in the Bible, but when it comes right down to it, they aren't things that the Bible teaches, that Jesus said. They're really just more us putting words into Jesus' mouth. And a lot of these things are things that we hold as deeply held beliefs. But if you hold on to them long enough and you're observant about life, then you run into this thing that we call reality. And reality, if you look at it, you have to realize you're wrong. In fact, that's one of my favorite definitions of reality. Reality is what you run into when you're wrong. And these spiritual misunderstandings, they aren't really just harmless kind of things that we've all sort of misquoted, that the Bible sort of teaches, and then we just shove our own thoughts into it. They're the kind of things that lead to disillusionment. They lead to disenchantment. They keep us from becoming all that God wants us to be and all that really we want to be. And today, I want to talk to you about one that is so widely held. In fact, I think this is probably the most widely held spiritual misunderstanding about Christianity. It's the idea that Christians shouldn't judge. Now, this one is present in just about everybody. We hold this so deeply. People who are Christians and people who aren't Christians, we all believe that there is a place where the Bible just says that Christians shouldn't judge. It's one we say to ourselves and we say to each other. But if we're honest, it leaves us with this kind of dilemma, because there's this thing again called reality. And the reality is we're all constantly forming opinions. We're forming opinions about what's right and what's wrong, which those are judgments. We're walking around forming opinions about what we think about you and about the way you dress, and about me and about the way I dress, and about the way we look, and about the things that we do, and the way we raise our kids, and the way we vote, the way we use our money. We're all constantly forming opinions all the time. We hold this idea that God thinks that we shouldn't judge, but it appears like reality is He's made us where we're constantly forming opinions. In fact, some of you right now, you haven't been really able to listen to what I say because you've been looking at, I wonder why he wore that shirt, and why does he look that way, and what's wrong with his hair, and why does he even say that we shouldn't judge? I mean, that's clearly in the Bible. That's not a misreading. And you can't even listen to me because you're so busy forming opinions about what I've said and the way I look and all of those things. I mean, reality just hits us. We come right up against it, and we have this thought happening to us all the time. But he's wrong. But somebody needs to talk to her about the way she's acting. And you aren't supposed to judge. And again, I'm not supposed to judge. But somebody does need to talk to him. Somebody does need to say something. We just can't seem to help ourselves. And then there's the other side of it. We not only know what it's like to form these opinions and make judgments about people, and we can't seem to help it. All of us, we all know what it's like to be judged. We've all been in a place where we felt a little uncomfortable and it looked like other people were looking down on us, and they were looking down on us because of the way we dressed or the way we looked or the fact that we came in a certain kind of car, or we didn't have a car, or we had this much money, or we didn't have that much money, or we had tattoos, or we didn't have tattoos. And the constant feeling all the time is we feel like we're being judged, and we don't enjoy being judged. I mean, it's like we feel like somebody just did a quick scan of us. They looked around the room. We could tell by the way they looked at us. They formed an opinion of us. They made up their mind. They don't say anything to you, but you just feel so judged. And nobody likes that. I mean, you can be judged about the way you raise your kids. I mean, your in-laws come over, and you just tell by the way when your kids do something, they think that you're wrong. Or you have friends, and you're out with them, and you order a beer, and nobody else orders anything, and you can tell they're looking at you like, oh, you have a drinking issue, do you? Or it can be the opposite. You go out, and everybody else gets something to drink, and you don't get something to drink, and they're like, oh, you're better than us, are you? You don't drink, and you want to just go, wait a second. It's not any of that kind of stuff. I mean, we've all felt judgment from other people in some way, and we all hate it. We don't like to be judged because what we want to say is, hey, just let me give you a chance. And if you understood my background and you'd understand that I'm not looking down on anybody about the drinking thing. I have an issue. And everybody knows what it's like to judge, and everybody knows what it's like to be judged. And in both of us, on both sides of that, there's this idea, you shouldn't judge. You just shouldn't do this thing. The Bible teaches that Christians shouldn't judge. The question is, with regard to this series, is does the Bible actually say that we shouldn't form judgments about each other? Well, the good news is, like all the other ones we've already talked about in this series, the Bible does have something to say about that. And the confusion, once you really read what the Bible has to say, I think you're going to be amazed about the wisdom that Jesus brings to this particular topic about don't judge, because we know we can't help it. We know we're constantly forming opinions, but we also know we don't like it. In fact, I'll tell you, when you see the wisdom that Jesus has to offer, you'll see how wise it really is and how good it is for your life. In fact, there have been times in my life where I've been off track with what God would want for my life, and as I look back now, I am so thankful that there are people who came to me and said, hey man, what you're doing it's just wrong. I mean, for the overall benefit of my life and my family and my marriage and my career, my money, the fact that people would come and confront me about something I was doing wrong, it's just been helpful to me. But then there's some of you that when somebody comes at you right in the middle of it, when there's something that needs to be confronted, you say to people, hey, you don't know me. Don't judge me. In addition to this, there's this thing going on inside of all of us all the time that we're constantly judging. We're forming opinions. We're looking at other people. And while all of that's happening, we all know how dangerous all of this is. We all need this wisdom on what the Bible actually has to say instead of this bad lip reading of just don't judge. We actually do need to hear what Jesus has to say, because judgment can ruin marriages and ruin relationships, ruin relationships between parents and children. It can destroy friendships. It's harmful. So into all of this confusion and all of this pain, Jesus brings his wisdom to bear. Here's what he said. Matthew chapter 7, verse 1. Do not judge. Well, there it is. It's right there out in front. And you said, see, it does say it. Do not judge. But you'll notice it's not a complete sentence. There's a comma there. And if that's all we had, then we could say, well, I don't seem to be able to stop doing it, and I sure do hate it when people do it to me, but there it is. It's wrong. You should not judge. But that's not what all he says. Do not judge, which basically means don't condemn based on your opinion. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. If you set yourself up as the judge of other people, if you hold yourself up, it'll come back at you. Now, I just say to you, this is not Jesus teaching that, karma, it all comes around, goes around. That's not what he's saying. In fact, let me just continue with verse 2. For in the same way that you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. To which we say, yeah, but she's really messed up, and somebody needs to talk to her. And Jesus says, hey, I'm just giving you a heads up. If you judge, you just need to know you're going to be judged in the same measure, in the same way, in the way you're judged, that's the way you're going to be judged. Now, here's what he's saying, and I think you'll see it, but what I want you to get is to get what he's not saying first. Jesus is not saying, never form an opinion about what somebody's doing, whether it's right or wrong. His point is not, hey, it's not your business what anybody's doing. Hey, why don't you just look at your own plate? Why don't you keep your eyes on your own work? It's not your business what's happening with anybody else in the world. That is not what he's saying. What Jesus is doing in this particular verse is he's teaching something in this about our forming opinions about people in the world. He's teaching what he's going to teach in just a few verses that becomes one of his most famous teachings, what we call the Golden Rule. He's saying to us, hey, in the way you judge, I want you to judge other people exactly the way you want people to judge you. Forming opinions is going to happen. When people looking at whether things you do are right or wrong, that's going to happen. So when you judge, I want you to do it in the way that you want it to be done to you. It's going to happen. So I want you to use the Golden Rule. Do for other people what you want them to do for you. Now, that's not that hard for me to figure out. Because when it comes to how I want people to judge me, well, I know for sure how I want God to judge me. I want the whole story to be taken into account. When you look at me, I hope you'll take my whole story into account. I hope you'll understand how I was raised, and you'll know about my dad, and you'll know about my mom, you'll know about how I was raised and what I was doing at a young age. I hope you'll understand. I had this teacher in the third grade named Miss Newbert, and for whatever reason, she hated that I wrote with my left hand, and so every day she hit me with a ruler on my left hand. She didn't know that I was stubborn, and that was just going to make it all that worse. I hope you'll hear about the coach that I had in the 8th grade that just dogged me every single day. I'd want you to know that God made me musical, but because I was musical and creative, it made me hang out with musicians. And in the 70s, when I was growing up and hanging out with musicians, every musician I knew was taking something up their nose or smoking something, and we were all drinking and doing drugs. And that's why I wound up in the place that I was. When I get judged, I want you to know the whole story. I want you to take everything into consideration. I mean, don't you? Because, see, here's the truth. If you let me tell you about me, if you let me tell you about my story, you let me tell you all the details of the story, when we get to the end of it, Jesus himself would be crying, and he'd be going, Ed, my goodness, no wonder you're such an idiot. I mean, it's a wonder you're as good as you are. I mean, when it comes to people forming opinions about me, I want them to take everything they know about me into consideration, and then I want some grace on top of that. I want people to say, well, yeah, he's not exactly what you would think of as a pastor, and I know he's a little rough around the edges. I know he's pretty aggressive, but if you knew everything about him, you'd understand he's actually got a pretty good heart. That's the way I want you to judge me, and that's the way I want God to judge me. And God's fully capable of that. God goes, I can do that because I know the whole story. I already know everything that happens. So when you get all bent out of shape, you just make sure, Ed, that you just give to other people what you're asking me and other people to give to you. You judge in exactly the way you want to be judged. It's Jesus' golden rule of judging. Same way, same measure as I want used on me. But just in case somebody in his audience, or maybe somebody listening to me, doesn't get it, Jesus continues, verse 3. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in someone else's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? Ed, why is it you're so motivated with that other person's problem and you pay no attention to your own problem? Well, that's easy. What problem? I don't have any problems. I mean, look, they got problems. I mean, they got great big problems, and I'm insightful, and I can see things that other people can't say, and I've got so much wisdom that I have to offer. Jesus says, look, why are you so interested in what's going on in them, the sawdust in their eye, and you will not deal with, you ignore, you choose to overlook the plank in your own eye. And here again, Jesus is teaching us something that's really deep, and it's really helpful if you and I, if we can help ourselves get this into our lives. What Jesus is saying is that when I see something in you, when I notice something in you, when I see something in you that bugs me, I need to use it as a clue. It needs to become a trigger in me. When I see something that I think needs to be corrected, it needs to be a trigger in me that I begin to say to God, God, what is it you want to deal with in me? When I see something in you, the trigger needs to be for me to look in the mirror. When I see something wrong, it needs to trigger in me, God, is there anything about that in me? Is there something in that you want to deal with in me? Listen, this is how Jesus finishes verse 4. How can you say, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? I mean, how can you do that? Well, now, if your response is, well, I don't have a plank in my eye. I mean, look, they got major problems. Have you noticed what's happening? They're on the path to destruction. Jesus is saying, hey, in those moments when you notice what's going on, and you'll notice he doesn't say that he doesn't see what's happening in the other person's life. He's not even saying that you should notice what's happening in the other person's. He's just saying, why is it you want to go after the speck of dust? I mean, that's going to have to be dealt with in their eye. Why are you so focused on that when you won't deal with what's in your own eye? I mean, why don't you allow, when you see something in somebody else, to say, hey, God, what do you What do you need to deal with in me? Why doesn't that become a trigger for you to first look in the mirror? Now, if you haven't been here very long, or somebody invited you and you've got a lot of church background and you came in and you heard our music and then you saw that video where we're making Jesus go pita, and you thought, oh my gosh, these people are way off track, and now you hear me say this and you're thinking to yourself, okay, I already got this place was weird, and you're just soft on sin, aren't you? You see this stuff going on in our culture. You see people living the wrong way. You don't like it when Christians point it out. Preacher, if that's where you are, then you just need to know, I'm done with community Christian. Well, that's not what I'm saying, because that's not what Jesus is saying. Jesus isn't saying you just ignore the stuff that's going on in our world. That's not at all what he's saying. I mean, look back at what Jesus says. He says that our first response when we see the junk, when we see what's going on in others in our world, our first response needs to be a trigger to look at ourselves and say, what is it about that God might see reflected in me? If our world would see that our first response would be to, when we see a problem, if they would see that our first response would be to deal with what's wrong in us, our culture, everybody would be way better off. See, at this point, Jesus gets to something that's really important for us to hear, and it's very strong. He says in verse 5, you hypocrite. You know what a hypocrite is in this instance? It's somebody who sees something in another person's life and goes for it instead of going for what everybody else sees so clearly in their own life. A hypocrite is somebody who recognizes something that needs to be dealt with in culture, in a person, in something going on. Notice Jesus doesn't deny any of this stuff about there being a speck in the eye. He doesn't say that's not true about what's going on in their life. He just says, if you're willing to go after that, but you're not willing to deal with yourself, you know what you are? Hey, you're just a hypocrite. Now, if we are all really honest, isn't that sort of where most of our country sees the church in our country today? As it just being hypocritical? And we want to point out all the problems we see, all the sin we see in the world, all the problems we see in culture, but then the people we back and the people we support, we don't want to ever admit that any problems have been going on with that. We don't want to ever address any of the problems. All Jesus is saying, why deny the problem that you have? Yes, there are problems. They need to be addressed. The other people do have specks in their eyes. Somebody needs to help them with that. But you can't do it because you're so unwilling to deal with your own stuff. But see, when that doesn't happen, it's right for the culture. It's right for, people to look at us and go, hey, you're just a hypocrite. And it doesn't just happen in cultures. It happens between husbands and wives, and between moms and daughters, and fathers and sons, and between bosses and managers. It happens in neighborhoods. It happens everywhere. See, when you're being judged, you don't think you're perfect. You don't think that you haven't messed up. But when somebody's coming at you and they're telling you about the problem that you have, and you can see that they're just so unaware of the problem they have, I can't listen to you because of your lack of awareness of your own problem. So why should I listen to you, Dad? Why should I listen to you, Mom? Why should I listen to you about what you see? When it's so clear to me, you fail to look in the mirror and see what everybody else sees. But thankfully, Jesus gives us a solution to this reality, and the solution is not the bad lip reading of, hey, Christians shouldn't judge. That's not his solution. Look at what he says in verse 5. You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye. Now, I don't know why it has taken me so long to see this. I don't know why I had to get to this age before I could finally come to the point of seeing it. But when I first deal with what's going on in me, when I use what I see in you and I first use it as a trigger to say, God, what is it in me that you need to deal with? When I come to that place and I use that as a trigger, I become the perfect candidate to be able to do what God needs to do to help somebody else in their own life. When there's something in me that just drives me crazy with what's happening in our world, with what's happening in other people, doesn't it take away the fact that there is something wrong with the other person? Doesn't take away that there's something wrong going on in the family. Doesn't mean they are getting everything to rest. But when it drives me crazy, often the problem is there's something in my eye. There's something in me that I have to deal with before I can deal with you. Jesus says, hey, Ed, you really care about the other guy's problem? Yes. You think it really needs to be dealt with? Yes. Something needs to be done about it? Yes. So, great. Then first, what? Call them? Write them? Text them? First, what do I go to them? Okay, what do I do first? No, don't do any of those. Okay, then what? Go look in the mirror. What? Yeah, first, why don't you go look in the mirror? Why would I go look in the mirror? Somebody needs to do something about them. Jesus says, yeah, I want somebody to do something about them. First, go look in the mirror. And if you're not willing to go look in the mirror, you're never going to be able to help them. But the problem is with them, I don't have a problem that you're aware of, that you're willing to deal with. Let me just say this again. What Jesus is teaching is that our first response when I see something in other people, when I have these opinions, which I can't stop myself from having, when I form these opinions about what's right and wrong, I'm often right about what's going on in another person, but my first response needs not to be to deal with them. My first response needs to be, God, what about that do you need to deal with in me? What is it that I see in their eye that also represents something that's going on in me? What is it in them that is driving me crazy that I need you to help me to deal with it then? See, when you hear me saying that, yeah, but Ed, you don't know what my daughter is doing and it's dangerous and you don't hear what's going on in our family. I get it, and that needs to be dealt with. But it cannot be dealt with until you deal with you. You may be the right person to deal with it. But first, Jesus says, you have to go and deal with you. And if you're unwilling to do that, you're very likely to cause a bigger problem by trying to take a speck of dust out of their eye when you're beating them on the head with a big plank sticking out of your own eye. First, you've got to use this as a trigger to look at you. And then notice, we haven't finished what he says. First, take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly. What's that last word? Clearly. Jesus, why do I need to see clearly? Because when you see clearly, then you can remove the speck from your brother's eyes. So there is something wrong. Yeah. I never said there was not anything wrong. I never said there wasn't a speck in their eye. I never said it didn't need to be. I never said your insight was off. I never said that your judgment about them was wrong. I never said they were okay. I didn't say any of that. I said, first, you need to deal with you so that you can deal with them. I'm concerned about them just as much as you are. I want there to be right just as much as you want it to be right. I just want you to be prepared to have the conversation by dealing with yourself first, and then you can have the conversation with them. First, remove the log from your own eye. First, you go first, Mom. You go first, Dad. You go first, brothers. You go first, sisters. You go first, bosses. You go first, and then you will see clearly that you can deal with the other person. See, here's what I'm learning. I'll just say it again. The fact that I'm willing to deal with my own sin, the fact that I'm willing to own it and allow God to begin to change me, the fact that I'm willing to do that makes me the perfect candidate to begin to help somebody else with theirs. The fact that the first line of response when I see something in somebody else's somebody is not, hey, somebody needs to talk to them. The first response when I first see it and go, oh, wow, that's a problem. The first response needs to be, God, is there anything about that in me? When I begin to do that and I begin to allow God to change me, then I can go help them. First, take the plank out of your own eye. And then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eyes. See, here's the truth about the bad lip reading that says Christians should never judge. That's not what Jesus said. And now you know that's not what Jesus said. If I could sum up the statement of truth of what Jesus actually said, he says, when you notice something that's off, when you see something that's wrong, and all your triggers go out, I need you first to stop. Use it a trigger to look at yourself, see what trace of that is in you, and then you'll be a candidate that I can use to help them. And if you're sitting here and you're saying, but I don't know how to find out if there's any trace of what I see in them in me. How do I know? How would I be able to figure out what the trace of what I see that bothers me so much in them? How do I see that in me? Here's what I'd tell you. You pay attention to the emotion that what they do brings up in you. When I see that, it just makes me so angry. Well, anger is your problem, not theirs. First, you need to deal with your anger. When I see her act like that, I just get so afraid. Well, yeah, fear is your issue. You need to deal with your issue and allow God to help you with that, and then you become the perfect candidate to deal with that. And you see this all the time. I mean, if when you see somebody else's sins, your first thought is, God, I'm just so angry. Why are you so angry? Well, I'm angry because you're angry about their sin. Come on now. Let's just all admit that your self-righteousness and God's righteousness, y'all aren't the same. What's with your anger? Why are you so angry about that? I've seen this in husbands and wives where there's an issue and the husband will just be so mad and he's so angry, and the wife sees the same thing. She sees the same problem. She's just not angry about it. And he's quoting Bible verses and he's yelling at people and he's talking about God this and God that. He's just so angry about that. And nobody can hear what he has to say because all they can see is his anger. That anger is a clue about the log that exists in you. That emotion that their problem brings up in you, the fear you feel, the anger you feel, the jealousy you feel, well, she shouldn't wear that. She shouldn't act that way. Okay, maybe she shouldn't. Why does it make you so jealous? That emotion, that's something you need to deal with. And the way you catch a glimpse of what you need to deal with is the emotion arises in you. You bring that up, you say, God, help me deal with that. And then you become the candidate to help them. Now, there's another part of this that we shouldn't miss, and I want to make sure that I talk about that, is if you're the person here and you're always saying to people, hey, don't judge me. The Bible says that you shouldn't judge. If all you throw out is the Bible shouldn't judge, and I feel like you're judging me and don't judge me all the time, would you just take a deep breath for a moment and just for a second, would you let me see if I can create a whole new category for you that maybe you haven't thought about? Is it possible? Is it just slightly possible that one of the people that came to talk to you about this issue, or the one person who wrote you an email, or the person that said, hey, could we get together, and they brought up the same issue, could it be that one of those people, that they aren't all hypocrites, that maybe one of those people, they did deal with their stuff, and the reason they felt like they had to say something is because they love you? Is it possible that they love you and they have been where you are, and they see where you're headed, and they know the pain that awaits you when you finally bump into reality? And they want to save you from pain. Could it be possible that they aren't judging you? That they're using what God has brought up in them, they've dealt with what's happened in them, and they love you enough that they want to try to save you the pain that they've already gone through? Could it be that they're just trying to help you? Could it be that they're trying to turn you around? See, maybe the truth is God even loved you enough that He gave them the insight, and He sent someone with flesh and blood who cared about you to ask you to look at yourself in the mirror too. Maybe they've already looked in the mirror and they've dealt with theirs, but you're so hiding behind, don't judge me and nobody can judge me, that you won't look in the mirror either. Maybe that's what you need to do. See, as is often the case with when we really listen to what Jesus has to say, Jesus has a little bit of something for everybody. So if you're currently on the run and you're just hiding behind the bad lip reading of "don't judge me," would you take a moment? Would you open yourself up and say, God, is there something that I need to see? Would you show it to me in the mirror? And if you're the person that's normally right and you've been in church a whole bunch and you can constantly see what's wrong in our culture and wrong with other people and wrong in your family and wrong, and everybody feels like you're judging them, would you first look in the mirror? Allow God to tell you, why is that emotion you feel? Why is that welling up in you? Don't judge. But now you know that's not the whole sentence. Lest you be judged. And when you're judged, make sure you're judged exactly the way you want people to judge you. Knowing the whole story and admitting you don't know everything and giving a whole lot of grace on top of that. And as you do that, then we can each help each other become the people that we all want to be and that God wants us to be, if we will follow the wisdom that Jesus gives us. Let's bow together and I'll pray for you. Father in heaven, thank you for the opportunity that is ours to read what your Son has taught us, to hear the wisdom that He brings to bear on what is reality of the opinions we form and the way that we deal with it wrongly so often. Father, if there's a person here and they felt judged by other people, would you help them to step back and ask if there's a whole other category, there is something they need to look at? Would they allow you to lovingly help them look in the mirror? And Father, for people that we notice things and we see things, would you help us look in the mirror too, so that we can help each other, so that all of us could help each other keep our eyes clear so we can see you clearly and we can become who you want us to be. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.